Y'all know what it is.
Hey there, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Eggs. This week, we have founder and CEO of Inner Confidence, Robbie Kramer. Robbie founded Inner Confidence in 2008 as a platform to help men improve their social skills, develop confidence and charisma, and improve their dating and love lives. But not only do the skills Robbie and his group teach apply to life and love, they are also applicable in the boardroom. Growing personally and professionally, developing a sense of worth and air of likability can help business leaders not only shine in interpersonal relationships, but can allow them to achieve more at work and build the lives they want. Joining us today for an insightful conversation about how to level up socially, professionally, and so much more. Please join us in welcoming to the show Inner Confidence founder, Robbie Kramer. Hey, Robbie, how are you, man?
Good. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for doing it. We just learned moments ago that you're calling in from Kiev. So we're literally crossing the globe for this conversation. So I really appreciate you making the time because I know you're getting towards the evening over there.
Yeah, it's end of the day for me, beginning for you guys, but glad we can connect.
Yeah. So Robbie, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into this field and maybe some college background, what got you going in this?
Yeah, I was basically the dorky golf poker nerd in high school and college. Was recruited to play for UC San Diego, and my life was basically just like golf, poker, and that was it. When it came to girls and dating, I had no idea what I was doing. Was totally clueless and just didn't really focus on it. And then when I graduated from university and realized my kind of dream of becoming a professional golfer wasn't gonna, turn into reality. I got a job. I was working in finance, and just from a dating perspective, like I had never really been on a date. The women I'd met up until then would usually through my social circle or through classes and that sort of thing, but I had no idea what I was doing when it came to dating. So I did some research on the internet, read some books, studied a bunch of stuff. Came across these guys that called themselves pickup artists that were teaching a bunch of crazy sort of tactics and routines to improve with women. That stuff was mostly weird, didn't really resonate with much of that. But through a lot of trial and error and meeting some interesting mentors, I pushed myself socially. I went out and started approaching women, which was something like totally terrifying for me. The idea of walking up to a random girl on the street and trying to start a conversation was one of the scariest things I did. Did that a ton in bars and clubs and that sort of thing as well. And just kind of learned from trial and error how to kind of handle this dating thing. So I've been teaching guys. I started a company back in 2009. And I've been teaching guys ever since. I have guys who come all the way to Kiev to do in-person training, and I do lots of online stuff as well. But yeah, that's kind of my story. Basically, just I was the guy who needed it the most and found out, some ways to improve my confidence and my social skills, and lucky enough to make a career out of it because I really love to do it.
Yeah, I actually I was on the fence on having you as a guest just because of the subject matter and that the sleaziness behind the pickup artist kind of thing. That's kind of the impression I got when you were offered as a guest for us. I was like, we don't need a pickup artist on our show. That's not what we're about. What are we going to have him talk about? And then I realized that, the conversational habits and things that you could learn from someone like you could actually apply in business and not just in the dating world or this or that. So I figured, see how this conversation goes.
Yeah, I figure that happens quite a lot. The industry has a little bit of a tainted reputation because of all these guys, especially now with, a lot of the Me Too movement and that sort of thing, a lot of the cultural issues in the US, it's definitely like a point of a hotter topic, you could say. But yeah, when I came across all that pickup stuff, it's just weird. It turns people off. And I feel bad for guys that kind of dive into that because it takes them down a path that they end up typically regretting. And then I've got to undo a ton of the nonsense that they've learned. So.
Well, and it seems like, just to sort of expand on Mike's point, I mean, the reality is the skills that you need to form a relationship, whether it's an interpersonal relationship for love or an interpersonal relationship with a sales prospect or a business leader or a coworker or whomever, are ostensibly the same, right? Now, maybe the end goal is different, but, maybe, versus, life and love, you're looking for a promotion. But the types of skills that you can teach, as somebody who has experience not only in dating, but also in running your own business, I think can be, really helpful for our audience.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very much the same. When you're selling yourself for dating, that's, you are the product. So if you can't sell, and, from a business standpoint, if you can't sell yourself, it's very difficult to sell a product and vice versa. So most of my training, in terms of like growing my business, that was sales, marketing, and a ton of personal growth too, with some different companies and organizations. So a lot.
Tell us about the early years of your business, how you guys started, some hurdles you had to get over as far as like, your first client that had to be an awkward kind of like trial and error kind of thing.
Yeah, the first thing I did, so I took some workshops or boot camps with this other company that was teaching something similar. I was a client of theirs first, and I realized that it was quite a profitable business because they had, I think, 12 guys all paying about $3,000 for a weekend long event. I'm like, okay, that's some serious cash. The overhead was almost nothing, right? You just need a little conference room and a few assistant coaches, and that was about it. So I was working for this company for about 1.5 years until they kind of imploded. They had some management problems and some drama there. But when they basically, ceased to exist, I started my own thing, and used some of the concepts that I was developing to kind of spin it into a slightly different niche market. And at the time I had a few clients that kind of spilled over from the company I was working with before, but now I was kind of on my own to do the marketing and the sales and bring new guys in the door. So I had no idea what I was doing when it came to that. But I took basically it was a training that I didn't have to pay for, but essentially I had to become like a marketer for this personal growth organization. It was called Landmark Education, if you guys have ever heard of it. Oh. And essentially they taught me how to lead a in-person seminar. So they taught me to basically stand up in front of 10 to 15 people and lead an intro seminar and try to get back of the room sales. So I learned this process of speaking from the stage to get back of the room sales. And then I later learned internet marketing. I still suck at internet marketing. It's just not my forte. But I was growing my business through hosting these seminars basically on meetup.com. So guys would jump on Meetup, and it was typically a lot of guys that, didn't have a very active social life. So have you guys heard of Meetup before?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they'd jump on Meetup and they'd see, learn how to improve your dating and love life. And they would come to my seminar, and I would give them some keys during the about an hour or 2 hour long event, and then offer them a chance to sign up for my training. And that was kind of working okay until Meetup banned anything relating to dating. So that was like my main sort of lead source and the kind of only lifeline for my business. So I realized, all right, I better, figure out a way to do some other sort of marketing, or I'm gonna have to shut the doors. And that's when I started podcasting. That was back, I think my first show was 2013, 2014. And I don't know if you guys are aware, but I also have a podcast. I'm, I think, 180 episodes in, something like that. And most of my clientele comes through my podcast, just listening to conversations like this I have with other guys in all sorts of fields. And so podcasting has kind of been my main way of generating leads and having the business, succeed.
That's awesome. Well, and I love that story too, of just sort of adaptability, sort of you had to shift gears. I'm thinking of the story in the news that just came out a week or so ago about OnlyFans, and they were going to switch the type of content that was allowed there, and just the panic attack that ensued. And I think ultimately they backed off the decision, but it makes a good point. This idea that, being wholly I guess owned by your platform. If you don't own the platform, you're always in danger. And you've heard things like this about Facebook and other platforms. If you have your Facebook group or whatever, and then Facebook bans you, well, so long to your group. So, so I think it's really an innovative story. And what I like about the path that you took going into podcasting specifically, not because we're biased around here or anything, but because, obviously that's something you can own, right? You create your own content, you develop your own community, you build your own relationships, and basically, can't be shut down. Now, platforms might be able to, knock you out or whatever, but nonetheless, you're still creating this thing that people can get. And it's, I think it's more empowering than the other version.
Yeah. And podcasting for me, they say when you're trying to develop content, you want to play into your strengths. And some people are good, at writing. Some people are good at speaking. Some people are good on video. And the whole idea of like writing copy and that thing just never came easy for me. Most of the people in my industry were making a lot of money, or the people who were making money were basically either copywriters who were kind of default or they're secondary dating coaches. And that's kind of why the industry has a bit of a bad reputation, because they're really good copywriters. They make all these outrageous claims, but then they don't back up on their promises. And just copywriting was not a platform that I was ever any good at, but I could talk all day long and just have a basic conversation and speak to people. And before like Zoom was popular, I wasn't really ever doing video podcasts like this. I am now, of course, but prior to that, it was just all conversations. And it was shocking to me how many people, back in the day, there wasn't a lot, but now podcasting has just kind of blown up. And have you guys heard of Jordan Harbinger?
Yeah. We're both.
He was a longtime friend of mine, and he was like the first guy I know to do a podcast, in one of the first podcasts I had ever heard of. And I was a guest on one of his earlier shows. And I remember everyone was laughing at him for starting a podcast, and look at him now. So go figure.
Well, he used to do The Art of Charm back in the day, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Before that, it was even called the Pickup Podcast.
Yeah.
And that was, yeah.
Maybe, bringing him up as a great example, right? Of a transition from that sort of sleazy stereotype that Mike was talking about early on to, what one could become, right? Because at least for me, I came to know Jordan probably about the time of Art of Charm, but I didn't listen to it a lot or anything. I was already married, so I wasn't looking for advice. But then he made sort of a jump into more of a mainstream direction where he's doing interviews with all kinds of people. And he's got one of the most well-produced shows out there. And so I became a fan maybe a little bit later, but I don't even think of that old sleazy stuff anymore. It's kind of funny how he was able to sort of transform that way.
Yeah. He made a great move by doing that. And it was, it was cool to watch him do that and kind of move on from the other stuff, because he had some drama there as well, which I was familiar with. So I'm glad he's crushing it now.
Well, we've had his producer on, Jason DeFilippo, has been a guest of our show. You probably know Jason if you know Jordan, but I like his podcast because he talks to everyone. He goes, like if I were to say no to having you on the show just because I don't like the mentality or the pickup artist kind of thing, then we could lose some valuable insights that you would bring to us that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And he's gone through and interviewed spies to CEOs to, everyone and anything really is on the table. And I really enjoy his podcast just because of that. So it's nice that you have a connection there.
Yeah, that's awesome. So maybe to that end, let's circle back around and start getting into some nitty gritty and how we can actually help our listeners sort of level up socially or professionally or however they want to apply this information. One of the things you brought up in your sort of intro pitch was this idea of, you were kind of I guess your target customer, right? You were the guy who needed this help. But I think so much of overcoming this, a problem, if we want to call it a problem, this insecurity or this whatever, so much of overcoming that is recognizing that you have it in the first place. I think that it's really common for folks to, maybe blame other people. How come everybody else sucks? How come nobody wants to hang out with me? I think it's really easy to sort of flip it around and blame other people instead of sort of turning around and looking at yourself. And so I wondered if you talk a little bit about just, I guess, becoming self-aware, or, understanding, recognizing this problem in the first place. And then, maybe those first couple steps getting started on the path to becoming more self-confident or charismatic, or, whatever we want to call it.
Yeah, that's a great point you make about becoming self-aware, because that's obviously the first step. And I had, I want to say almost zero self-awareness when it came to a lot of things prior to getting into this. Like it just wasn't something that really dawned on me. I wasn't, I guess they call it like meta thinking. I wasn't really ever thinking about what I was thinking or kind of thinking about how I was coming across. I was just busy doing what I was doing. And when I realized that, I needed a lot of help when it came to dating, and I had no idea what I was doing, that's when I first kind of took a look in the mirror. I was like, all right, I wonder how people perceive me. Am I annoying? Am I a conversation, value adder, or I'm a detractor? What is even attractive to women? Or is it the same? Like, I had all these questions that I didn't know I had, basically. So the first thing that I realized I needed to do was I felt like, you guys heard of the nice guy syndrome?
Yeah, I fall in that category.
Yeah. I was the quintessential nice guy, and I was always like the guy in the friend zone. And I had a lot of friends, so I figured I must be doing something right. But women really never paid much attention to me, or seemed to be interested in me romantically. So I read this book. It was called No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert Glover. And I actually saw how a lot of the behavior I was running was, they call it nice guy, but it's really inauthentic, because you're just being nice to essentially avoid confrontation and avoid tension. So I realized that I needed to step into confrontation, step into tension, and that would allow me to grow. So I did a bunch of exercises, and I call them social freedom exercises to get over that. A lot of those involve just basically social things out in public, doing something as embarrassing as just lying down on the sidewalk, for a minute until people start to get worried that you're actually like, sick or something. Or just, something as easy as trying to ask 100 people for the time or directions, like in the period of 30 minutes to an hour. They found, actually, there's a recent article that came out that said that our fear of strangers is actually, they said that you can cure a lot of the depression problems by actually talking to strangers. And when I saw that article, I was like, oh, okay, this is something I've been doing forever. But now they actually have the science behind it. And they said, because most strangers you talk to end up being normal, cool, interesting people. It's that, 1 or 2%, of course, that our parents tell us don't talk to strangers, stranger danger. But actually talking to strangers and having random conversations with people you don't know is one of the most therapeutic things you can do. So that was, for me, that was very transformational, because I was always, I was not one to start a conversation with someone I didn't know. I wasn't one to kind of make that inroad. And that's so necessary in life and business. If you want to get anywhere, you can't just expect people to come and seek you out. If you have nothing of value, or you're new to an industry, or, you haven't built something, like, you're the person that needs to go and make that happen. You need to be the rainmaker, and you have to have those skills and the cojones to go out there and get rejected. And rejection is just a part of life. And it was something I was totally afraid of. The idea of being rejected by a girl just was insane, scary. And so the first time I kind of went out and basically just walked up to girls and said, hey, I think you're really cute. I wanted to come say hi. That scared the hell out of me. And, but after doing it many times, I realized, okay, no big deal. The worst that's going to happen is she's going to tell me she has a boyfriend or tell me she's not interested. And usually people are very flattered. So just kind of going up and approaching people, getting over my fear of rejection, that was really the biggest thing that allowed me to grow and break out of the lack of confidence I had.
I like that. On your website, I noticed you have a area called Conversational Confidence. Is that kind of what you're building to, is like by doing these steps and just asking the time or, the bus schedule, is that kind of building that confidence? And once you have that structure, you can go in and kind of, have a more of a genuine conversation and go from there? Are there other techniques in the process of building your conversational confidence that you could throw at us?
Yeah, so conversational confidence, it's actually like one of the hardest things. Being a good conversationalist is something that I think it's the hardest thing to teach, maybe that I've come across. And there's not a ton of resources out there when it comes to being a great conversationalist. Because, I mean, conversation is such a humongous field of study, right? And everyone's got their different styles. Some people are extroverts, some people are introverts, some people love to talk, some people don't. I'm not really, I guess I'm an extrovert. I'm kind of in the middle. Like, I recharge my batteries by being around people, which is, they say, the definition of extrovert, or introverts recharge their batteries by being alone. But I was never I'm not a big conversationalist. I'm not really one to go out and have conversations or start conversations. I'm more of a listener. But they say, actually, to be a better conversationalist, you should be a better listener, which is one of the key points in that piece that I have, is that, first, everyone loves to talk, and everyone loves to talk about themselves. And if you can give them the platform to listen, or if you can be the one listening, they'll typically, find you to be much more attractive and be much more interested. But it's that initial stage to get them talking in the first place. Like, if you approach a girl, she's not going to immediately just start talking to you. Obviously, you've got to say something of value to make her want to talk to you, or in any sort of business meeting, right? If you just go in there and hope to listen with no nothing, that's useless, of course. But especially for guys, I tell them that being a great conversationalist just comes when you're no longer feeling anxiety, and you're not worried about getting rejected. Because most of us, when we're feeling relaxed and normal and at ease, can easily have a conversation and enjoy that conversation. But our IQ drops, and we literally go into like a fight or flight or a freeze sort of mentality when we're dealing with a stressful situation, whether that's speaking on a stage, approaching a woman, doing something where you could be ostracized socially and publicly. Our IQ drops, so our conversation tends to also suffer. So that's that's the problem. And the best thing to do to get over it is simple reps. Doing a lot of reps, getting a lot of practice. Things like Toastmasters is great. Obviously, for me, podcasting has been a great way to kind of improve my social skills and to have better conversations. And it all kind of leads to, all those things together, if you're doing them in conjunction, leads to results. But you can't expect to transform this stuff overnight. It takes a really long time.
Yeah, what I like about what you're saying specifically is, this idea of repetition, right? That basically there isn't a shortcut to this. You're not going to be able to pop a magic pill or something. Well, I guess there's a couple of pills you could maybe take that might improve your conversation. But generally speaking, if you're trying to improve as a human being and you're trying to grow socially, part of it is just putting in the work, and it sounds cliche because we hear that as it pertains to everything, right? Building a business or going to school or whatever it is, right? Everything is just do the work. But if there's anything we hear from everybody, podcasters and magazine articles and the news and everything, it's do the work. Like that is the trick. And so, but one of the things you touched on, when you were talking about your idea of sort of, talk to strangers and this idea of finding social freedom, what occurs to me is that really fear is the problem here. Yeah. And so that it's fear of ostracism. I'm going to change the word. I can't do that. Fear of looking stupid in front of people. Fear of failure, fear of whatever. But ultimately what we're talking about is fear. So, earlier, even earlier in this conversation, I was calling it insecurity or lack of confidence. But really what it is that we're afraid. And so you mentioned, though, that how we overcome fear is the same way we do it in life, right? When you learn to walk, you're going to fall a couple of times, but over time, you develop a confidence because you get better and you're falling less and less, and if you're me, you only fall every so often now. And, but at this point, I'm not afraid to walk anymore, and that sort of process, I think, could be sort of, I guess, mirrored here. This idea that, you have to walk before you run, but once you've got in the reps and you've done the time, it becomes easier and easier. And Mike has always been a sort of an entertainer. He's always worked in the clubs and stuff like that. But being on camera and stuff like that is something that I just had never thought I would do.
Yeah.
And I can say, it sounds to me like this is your experience too, Robbie, that being on a podcast and having this opportunity to sort of get out and talk, like I'm infinitely more comfortable now at episode 200 something than I was at episode 5. And in fact, we leave those episodes up in our feed so that people can go back and just see how bad it was. So that, it just to remind ourselves and, see how good it's gotten. And, we still have a long ways to go, but I mean, we're certainly more comfortable on camera now. We have a better time carrying on a conversation, all that stuff. But I think it's just exactly what you're saying. It's repetition, it's practice, it's those things, and stop looking for a shortcut, rather just go do the work.
Yeah, I
was just going to say one of the hardest things to do is film yourself and, give like a monologue or basically create like a YouTube video or any sort of content. And it's also one of the things that's the most harshly judged. You put up a YouTube video or you put up a TikTok or something, and like people are just going to flame you in the comments nonstop. So just I got so much value just from doing that. Just and the horrible process of watching yourself, looking at the footage, hating the sound of your voice for a while until you get used to it. I don't know if you guys had that experience, but like for most people, and I do this with my clients, I actually film them undercover with a hidden camera and audio approaching women, and they will see what they're doing and they'll hear themselves, and it's so hard for them to watch it at first because it's like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. I look like an idiot. I sound horrible. And that process is just super therapeutic. And sometimes I even film them watching the film and to see their reactions and to see all the kind of like self-loathing and the shit it brings up. Yeah. So it's
well, no, I mean, it's true, and I mean, I still hate the sound of my voice. I still don't like seeing myself on camera. And subconsciously, I mean, I don't go back and listen to our episodes. I probably should, but subconsciously I just avoid them. Right. Like I write up the show, I publish the show, I do all that stuff, but I don't go back. I feel horrible for Mike because he does all that and everything. So Mike has to go back and listen to it. But I avoid it like the plague. I only go back to it if I have to go find a point or if I want to, share something or whatever. But it is challenging to overcome. But I think you're right that there really is something to sort of seeing yourself the way others see you, or in this case, the way a camera sees you, so that you can understand, how you perform or how you're coming off to other people. And so I wonder if you could take
Ryan, before we,
go ahead.
I used to do door-to-door sales multiple times, like for
knives.
No, auto glass. So, and I was the crew chief. Ryan actually went on a day trip with me once when we went I had to work. He was in town visiting, but I would take guys out and drop them off in neighborhoods to sell auto glass. And before every day, we would all get together. We'd have a group meeting, and then we would role play our sales pitch with each other, just to kind of warm up the talking and just sales in general. And every time I'd get a new guy in, it was very awkward for him to get up there and try and sell me on why I should get auto glass, repaired, fixed, or whatever. And you could always kind of see the hesitancy, but within like a week of them actually going out and doing it door to door, knocking and actually having these conversations with people, you could see them really kind of come into themselves and actually get their pitch, for lack of a better word, down where they could actually see results. And I could see how this would apply in your scenario as well, in the dating and all that stuff, because the more that you actually do it, the easier it's going to be. And the more natural it's going to sound, and the more confident you're going to be. And, if it didn't work, you can wash your hands of it, move on to the next house. There's always another house. That's what I would always tell them. It's not like there's a lack of broken windows in Phoenix. So I just thought that as you were talking about the reps, that thought came to my head. And I can tell you, I was the same way when I first joined the company and was starting to do sales. I got better as time went on. And, as I worked my way up in the company, Ryan, when you went out with me, I think we sold like 8 or 9 windshields in a 3-hour period, which is pretty damn good money. So it's like repetition, practice, you'll see results. what I was getting at.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. I mean, completely everything about it. That first house you probably walk up to, afterwards when the person tells you to,
Yeah.
says bye-bye, you're like, oh my God, I'm such a loser, blah, blah, blah. But then, it doesn't take a lot. Guys are always surprised. Typically after even the first, 10 or 20, they're like, wow, this is so much easier. And it's actually like really empowering and fun. And it's more of an exercise in personal development than it isn't even, getting the results. Like, of course, guys want to get a phone number and a date and all that stuff. But after they do it, they're like, oh my God, this is like the most alive I've felt in years, because I'm actually facing my fear and doing something that scares me. And I haven't felt like this in God knows how long. It's crazy how often I hear that, almost every single guy. And sales and going door to door, whatever you're selling, it's the same thing, because it's the same sort of social programming that's telling us, if you do this and you get rejected, oh my God, you're horrible, or you're this, you're going to die, or whatever crazy illogical stuff is going through our head. But yeah, it's all the same.
Yeah,
I think that's right. I would like to dig in a little bit more when you were talking about sort of, conversational confidence, and we were sort of digging into that, and this repetition is certainly a piece of that. One of the things you touched on, and it was just sort of in passing, but I think it's really important, especially if we're trying to be conversational, is this idea that we need to add value to the conversation. We actually do need to bring something. I think like your point about listening is obviously critical. I mean, if you sit and talk over them the entire time, it's tough to make any kind of relationship happen. But that idea of bringing value. And so I wonder if you could talk about, I don't know, being cognizant in conversation, and, the way that we should be carrying ourselves, or the types of conversations we should be having, if we want to move the ball, or if we want to endear ourselves to somebody.
Can you believe this weather? It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, that's the first part, vibing. There's kind of stages of a conversation, and I'm glad you brought that up, because vibing, or just talking about fluff or small talk, that's always the beginning to any conversation. If you try to dive straight in to what you're trying to do, you just kind of come across as an arrogant or aggressive sort of, D-bag, whether that's with dating or with sales, or with any sort of, thing where there's kind of like this unspoken, if we connect, eventually a relationship will happen, this will happen. Or, for guys that are always like, when's sex going to happen, sort of thing. But if you just immediately start talking about that, it's just totally taboo, and you're going to, good luck. That's not going to happen. And same thing with sales. If you push the envelope too hard, or you're really pressuring someone to buy, you're going to lose that sale. So the first part is vibing, and just having a kind of chit chat, a normal back and forth. And then that kind of goes into what I call wide rapport. And wide rapport is simply finding different pieces, or finding different information that you kind of connect on. That's kind of what happens in the first 20 or 30 minutes on a typical date. You're just kind of having a conversation, talking about your hobbies, what you like to do, what you're about, this and that. You're trying to avoid that kind of job interview mode where you just ask question after question. I call that Walter Cronkite mode. You don't want to be that guy. Regardless, it should be kind of the investment in the conversation is important. Both parties should be equally investing. So if one party is way over invested, that's the party that typically doesn't have any value, and they're trying to extract value from the other side. So if you find yourself as the guy who's always kind of driving the conversation, typically means that the other person probably just doesn't care that much, or doesn't, it'll usually lead to a lack of further conversations. And then we get into, once, the wide rapport is those things that we're finding that are commonalities. And then deep rapport is when we find something that we're both kind of emotionally invested in, and then we go really deep into that. And those are those conversations where it feels like, the whole kind of room disappears and time stops, and you're just having such an interesting, conversation in time, like everything else just kind of melts away. And that's what we're all looking for. We're looking for those connected moments where we feel, where nothing else is really mattering. So that's kind of like the stages of a conversation. And in terms of, I think you asked about offering value. Really just.
And actually, if you want, I can add a little bit to that, because I think maybe I wasn't that clear in what I was trying to get at. And sure. You actually sort of touched on a little bit in this idea of wide rapport. But I know even for me personally, and I'll just sort of speak from my experience, because I imagine it's fairly common. there is this inclination to, I guess, hype yourself up, right? You mentioned that in dating specifically, or maybe even in a job interview, you are the product, right? So there's sort of this inclination to go on about your achievements, or, this high status stuff you've done, or these people, or whatever, there's sort of this stuff that goes on where you're kind of putting yourself on display, right? It's the peacock feathers are out and in full bloom, and we're trying to show off a little bit and talk about what we do. Obviously, that can be a little bit off-putting, but where is the balance? So when I'm talking about adding value, I mean, of course, I suppose for a dating prospect or a job prospect, it's good for them to know, that you're put together and you can keep a job, and that you can, maybe you have built some relationships that are of value in the past. So we can use all those as markers of, you seem like a reasonable human being. But like, where is the line in there? Like, how much should you be giving versus how much should you be taking, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, a really good point. It's could you back up for a second from because I lost my train of thought. I had a really good answer. What was it that you said right before that part, though?
Yeah. Well, so we were talking about deep rapport and wide rapport. And
wide rapport, right?
Yep. So we were working our way through there. And basically what I was trying to understand was, the part about pitching ourselves, like how much should we be giving or tooting our own horn in a, scenario where we're meeting somebody new.
Right. So the best, because obviously if we come across as like braggarts, and if we're too much about, oh, look at me, that's a huge turnoff. I think that's the biggest turnoff. And the best way to do that is actually through stories. So if you tell a story and the story happens to have some key points about your character, then you get the opportunity to show versus tell. Because no one, if I go to a job interview and they ask, this is super cliche. I don't even remember the last time I was at a job interview, so I'm not the best person to ask. But if they're like, what are your strengths? And you just start saying, oh, I'm confident and I'm cool and I'm funny and blah, 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 you're just going to sound like a total idiot. But if you tell a story that illustrates all those points, then you're showing versus telling. So that's a big thing there is, the best sort of conversations are usually just people sharing stories. This happened, tell a story, they tell a story. And one thing that I always tell my clients to do on dates is I tell them to play, basically, call it the questions game. You guys have probably played. It's like truth or dare without the dare. And it's really easy. 3 rules. You have to be honest. You have to answer the question that you ask. And you have to ask something that's slightly embarrassing, or and so that keeps the conversation fun and interesting, because you're asking questions that lead to interesting stories typically. And I tell my clients, like, if you're going to ask a question about, what's the time that your most embarrassing moment in high school, you can have a story ready for that. And you've probably told the story 100 times, and you can, just like a stand-up comedian, when they tell a joke, they've told that joke hundreds of times. They know exactly, where to do the correct sort of voice inflection and the timing and the delivery of those jokes. Typically, when you go on dates, especially first dates, it's kind of the same thing over and over and over. And a lot of conversations, you're going to notice you're going to have those same conversations in sales or in business. So if you kind of pay attention and you actually think about the stories you're typically telling, think about the conversational pieces that you're telling, then you know what's going to be good content versus bad content. And you can kind of reverse engineer a lot of those processes by realizing kind of like, what are you doing all the time and how can you improve that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So when I was younger, I used to do exactly what Ryan was talking about. Oh, I do this, I do that. I'm a DJ. I, like try and oversell and really, as I've gotten older, like I've got new neighbors that just moved in about a year ago, and it took them 8 months for them to even know what I did for work. It took me, I barely brought up the podcast to them because I didn't want them going and listening to all 200 episodes and knowing everything about them. But, it's like stuff like that. I don't even share anymore. I'm kind of a very quiet person. I listen a lot more than I talk. And when I do talk, I try and have something to say versus just, trying to spout my accomplishments to try and get kudos or however it goes. But that took me a long time to kind of pick up on that I was doing was like almost bragging to a point, and that comes across wrong. What are some other things that you see a lot of your clients doing that they might not realize they're doing that are problems? Like on a first date, for example, what are some things that they might do or say that are turnoffs more than actual positives?
Yeah, the biggest thing, the way that guys screw up dates is it's more about logistics and how the logistics influence the conversation. That are the problem. So a lot of guys will just do a dinner date, the kind of standard meet at 8:30, have a dinner. They don't really have a plan for anything after the dinner or anything else. It's just you sit down, you go to a restaurant, right? You got the waiter coming over every few minutes, and they're interrupting the conversation. And it's kind of like a job interview where you're like, all right, so where are you from? Where'd you grow up? Blah, blah, blah. And it's just this exchange of data. And
take them to a steakhouse when they're vegan.
And then, so they have this exchange of data for an hour and a half. And then after that, they're like, all right, want to come back to my place? And the girl's like, no, why are you asking me? It's too aggressive. And then they hope for a second date where they kind of rinse and repeat that process. And I tell them that's kind of the worst thing you can do, or especially if you try to go to a movie where you can't have a conversation, or you try to take them to like somewhere on the very first date where the focus is not on the conversation, but it's on something else, like a movie, for example. So it's important to be aware of the venue. And what I tell clients is the first thing that you should do is the first venue of a date should just be like 20, 30 minutes. It could be a walk in the park. It could be at a coffee shop. I love the walk and talk in the park. I think that's the easiest thing, especially when it comes to lockdowns. You can, parks are always open. And you just, grab a coffee and you walk and talk. You have that kind of vibing, wide rapport conversation for 20 or 30 minutes. And then if you're walking around, you're already kind of changing venues. But if it's cold and you can't do that, then you kind of, duck into a bar or a lounge, have a drink. Hopefully you could be seated on something that you can kind of sit next to each other. So it doesn't feel like that interview where you're across. And then you can play the questions game, or you can have a more sort of deep rapport style conversation because you've kind of gotten over that vibing part. And then from there, if you guys are both clicking and you start to feel that chemistry, it's usually pretty obvious from like the second or third hour. If you're not feeling the chemistry, you just end the date. And if you end it on your terms, most guys feel a bit more empowered by that. And if you're not feeling chemistry, but if you are feeling the chemistry, I say go do something that makes you kind of feel like a couple. So that's when you can go and, do something like an arcade, for example, where you play skee ball or you play arcade games or the basketball game. And now the conversation focus is not so much on you and her, it's on the activity. Because how long can you really have a back and forth about each other? Like if you do that for more than like an hour and a half, 2 hours, it can feel like overkill. So that's kind of the way that a good sort of dating progression works, and the way that a natural sort of relationship will develop. It's first you talk and get to know each other, but then you go and you do stuff together. And that doing stuff together actually shows you a lot more about the person than the conversation, because you see them, when they get pissed off and they miss a basketball shot and they throw it at the employee and then they yell at them and you say, wow, that person's a real asshole. They're a horrible human being. I shouldn't be dating them, right? Which you're not going to ever find out in a conversation. So that's kind of the cool thing about dating. I'm not sure if you could do that in the business world. Well, obviously, yeah, in the business world, you can go and you can do stuff together. And you can figure out if you're a good fit as an employee or as a boss. And I mean, if I keep my company as few employees as possible, but if I do hire people, I always go and I try to do things with them, or I party with them first and see what sort of they're like, and then I'll know if we click and we can work together.
I was just looking at go ahead.
I was gonna say we had a guest on that's a business coach, and he won't do coffee. He won't sit down and have coffee with someone. He does a walk and talk, and it's the same kind of principle. He wants to get to know you as I can't remember his name. I'll have to look it up, but he wants to get to know you on a personal level before he gets into the nitty gritty of, your business or your finances or this or that. Just A, to figure out what kind of person you are, and B, to have a real conversation versus just getting straight to business. And I like that. I think it's kind of a unique approach, and I'd like to try it more often myself. So Ryan, sorry to cut you off.
Well, I was just going to say, I actually saw a job application came across my desk yesterday that was, for a big remote company, actually one of the biggest remote companies in the world. And they break down what you are, what the hiring process is like, So first it's, you'll file your paperwork, blah, blah, blah. But by the time you get into week 2, they're doing exactly that. Now, there's a fully distributed company, so they can't really, do a walk and talk or sit you down or whatever, but it's virtual coffees or whatever with everybody on your team. It's, some sort of team building activity before you're even hired, right? And it's for exactly the reason you're describing. It's this idea of developing a little bit of a personal relationship. We will figure out if you can rise to the occasion at work, but we need to understand if we're even going to work as people, or if you're even capable of sort of, gelling with this team.
Yeah.
And, or even bother going any further. So I think those are all really great points.
I actually went on a date about a month ago with a girl. I was down in Mexico, and we ended up going and walking through the shops. And up until then, I had, she's cute, she's a good personality, kind of a fun girl. And as we're going through this shop, how like the salespeople and, like, hey, buy this, and they'll bring a bunch of different stuff up and get really in your face.
Oh, Mexico for sure.
Yeah. One of the shop owners was doing that to us, and she just lost her cool, completely lost her shit. And that instantly was red flag for me. And I knew right then and there that this isn't going to work out, because
just wait until you leave your laundry wadded up on the floor. That doesn't end well.
And so, I mean, that's exactly what you're looking. I'm sure that's kind of what you're looking for in these kind of scenarios, is you want to know the real person, not the makeup and the first date person. You want to know what you're getting into. And that's always been my hang up with dating is, I work in the nightlife industry. I'm in a bar every night. I'm meeting people when they've 2 or 3 drinks in, they're having fun. It's always a fun time, right? But what happens when you get home? What happens when you actually hang out with this person in real life versus, the club or, 3 or 4 drinks in? And I kind of have this personal rule that I never go home with anyone from the bar. And I never, since it's where I work, I never shit where I eat. So I never go and try and pick up people in venues I work at, just because it's, I don't want to deal with the drama that comes with that. I've learned from that mistake.
Yeah, I used to work I didn't really officially work in nightlife, but I had a weird situation, but I was kind of in business with some club promoters. I was supplying them with housing for their models. And, they were club promoters in LA, New York, and Miami, and they would bring models.
I wish I'd have known you then. It could have been my house.
And I was, I went through a period of time where I was basically at the nightclubs almost every night, because I could show up to these tables with all these models and free bottles. And that was kind of one of the perks of providing the house. And I got to tell you, I met the most interesting people, but also some of the most quote unquote toxic or not the best sort of people to date or to do business with through that sort of scene. And they were fun. They were awesome. Amazing times, amazing stories. But when it came down to actually trusting and getting things done and keeping words, you gotta, be cognizant of where you met these people and what they're usually like. So yeah, I can relate to you on that.
So I would like to transition into just something that's a little bit more, maybe it's something we can kind of shotgun actually, but I think it comes off of the things we've been talking about pretty well. So first of all is maybe just being cognizant of the language we're using. Are there pitfalls? Are there landmines? Are there things like that we should be avoiding? Second part of this question, or the thing I'd like to explore, is just body language, how to carry ourselves, things we should look out for, that kinds of thing. And, I understand your expertise is in dating, so feel free to frame it that way, and we'll allow people to sort of extrapolate this stuff into their business lives or whatever.
Sure. So it was body language. What was the first one?
Body language, and then just sort of like physical language, the language that we're using, the types of words we should be saying. Are there things that we should be avoiding altogether? Is there like a secret word, a brown noise that's going to just, cause us to go, shit the bed.
Right. I think that has obviously you got to know your audience. That's the first and foremost, the most important thing when it comes to language, right? And from a dating perspective, usually you should know your audience before you're actually on a date with them. And you can really get a feel for kind of how a person's like, or how much profanity they use, or kind of how they were brought up by when you first meet them, whether that's sort of online dating or I'm a big fan of not using online dating. Obviously, sometimes you have to do it, but meeting people on the street or bars, clubs, wherever, real life. And you're usually going to get a feel for what a person's kind of profanity level is, or how comfortable they are, kind of how open they are from the beginning. And the best thing is to kind of act like a mirror and kind of mirror what they're doing. And that way you're never going to be way off. Right. So that's one strategy is to kind of be a mirror and a chameleon. That's typically what I do. Or you can kind of go to the other end of the spectrum and just have the attitude like, listen, they're either going to take it or leave it. They're either going to like me or they're not going to like me. And these are people who are a little bit more sort of bold or aggressive in the first place. And their attitude is kind of just like, I'm going to be unapologetically me. And if they like me, great. And I'm guessing only, 10 or 20% of people are going to like me, and the other 80%, well, whatever, no big deal. We just don't click. So if you're okay with having all those people dislike you, I think that's great. Me personally, I struggle with that, right? I'm better at kind of being a mirror and trying to figure out how to connect with more people, and to see if that's, after I realize, all right, is there a connection here or not? Then either take it deeper or not. But I know some people who are just very abrasive, very aggressive, and that works for them as well. So I think you kind of have to play to your strength and decide, like, if you don't mind being abrasive and aggressive and just going that route, more power to you. And if that feels uncomfortable for you, I think you can do more the mirror strategy.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's something in the middle there too, right? Where, or maybe this is the realization to have in there, is that you're not going to be all things to all people. Right. And so, maybe you don't want to be off-putting, in the case of maybe these guys that are a little more aggressive or a little more abrasive. So maybe the goal isn't to be so confident that you're just putting off everybody. But I think also being aware, maybe as measuring your success, how much success am I able to pull out of a room, or how many numbers am I able to get, or, whatever your metric is. I think it makes sense to understand that you're also not going to work with everybody. Right. And that's okay. That can just be part of it.
For sure. Yeah. You're just not. And, I like to say, when it comes to dating, if you're batting kind of like the best batters in the major league, 30%, you're as good as you're going to do. Right. If you go out and you approach 10 women and you walk away with 3 phone numbers, you're not going to do much better than that. So that's a good metric to do it by. And then as far as body language, the eye contact is obviously very important. Women are going to look at that first. They're going to see, because eyes tell us everything: how confident the person is, how they deal with tension and conflict. And a lot of guys struggle a lot with their eye contact. And for a lot of people in general, like for me, eye contact, when I first got into this stuff, wasn't even something I was aware of. I didn't really even think about it. I didn't really look at people in the eyes a whole lot. And it's something I worked on. One exercise I did, I would just go out and walk around the street and try to make eye contact with everyone. And
it's the funniest thing to do that, because you do that instantly. Everyone looks away. It's like
totally.
Like you'll just look at someone and they look down at the shoes. It just kind of, it's the funniest thing to me. I'll do it on purpose just to mess with people.
Totally. Yeah. It can get confrontational too if you do it to the wrong guy.
Yeah. Shit.
You got to have the nod.
Yeah.
Half a second. But it's when you do it to women, it's so powerful, because very few guys hold eye contact. And it's amazing how much, or how easily it is to succeed at dating if you can just walk around and make eye contact with beautiful women and hold it. A lot of times they'll break it and they'll start smiling, or they'll break first and smile. And that's the biggest approach invitation you're ever going to get. If you're standing at a bar sipping your drink and you make eyes with a girl across the way and she holds that eye contact and then she smiles, like, you're not going to get a better approach invitation. If you don't go talk to her, if you're a single guy, like, jump off a bridge and kill yourself. Because like, that is as good as you're going to get. Like that's come talk to me, please. But so many guys miss that. I mean, I used to miss that stuff all the time. My buddy's like, that girl's like smiling at you. Why don't you go talk to her? Oh, I don't know what to say. So eye contact.
And it's probably exactly what Mike was describing too, right? So many people are quick to look away. So, I mean, if you're just, I don't know, a young Padawan working on your eye contact skills and you give her the look and she turns and smiles, well, by then you've already looked too. And you're like, oh my God, I can't keep looking. And so, so it's possible people are just missing that signal altogether. So I think it's great that you're calling that out.
Yeah, it's eye contact is totally missed. And then as far as other body language, confident people usually, they take up a little bit more space than unconfident people. That's kind of an easy, obvious one. There's a great book called What Every Body Is Saying. I think it's Joe Navarro. And he breaks down a lot of the nuances in terms of body language. He is like I think an FBI or former FBI negotiator. And, if someone's holding their neck, for example, it says something about if they're comfortable or not. And there's different sort of like hair twirling, which can show attraction versus actually they're just comforting themselves. So you don't know if someone's lying, he said, but you can tell if they're comfortable or uncomfortable, or if their feet are kind of pointing away or their body's kind of pointing away while you're talking to them. Obviously they're trying to leave that conversation. And that's really important.
I'm pretty sure Jordan actually interviewed that guy recently. I think I listened to that episode with him. And if you want to go down a rabbit hole of body language, I'm pretty sure Jordan has interviewed him. And even in sales, it comes to, like if someone's folding their arms, mirroring the person, your client that you're trying to sell, if you're folding your arms, they're going to fold their arms as well. And that's a defensive posture. And you're setting yourself up for failure just by the way you approaching someone for a sales perspective. If you're folding your arms, you're saying no, essentially, and they're going to mirror you and vice versa. So it's kind of you have to be really aware of what your body language is saying to someone else. If you're in sales, if you're dating, if you're just having a general conversation with someone, you just have to be very aware of stuff like that. So,
yeah. And the best way to tell if a woman is attracted to you or not is through her body. It's really the only way to tell. Cause we're all very good at lying, and what we say, has almost no bearing on how we feel a lot of the times, especially if we don't want to hurt someone's feelings. So one of the biggest sticking points for my clients is when it comes to reading body language, most of them really don't have any sort of awareness or cognizance of the subtleties there. And through the practice of approaching people and going on more dates and getting those repetitions, and they start to see the patterns, because this is all just pattern recognition, right? They see the same sort of things over and over, and they realize, okay, she's attracted because she's willing to sort of like, not cover her vital organs, and she's not kind of turning away, or she's not trying to walk away as I'm talking to her. And obviously touching and that stuff kind of comes in later or sooner, depending on who you're dealing with. But being able to pick up on those subtle body language hints and understand like what those triggers are and the information those can give you will give you a humongous leg up. And not knowing them, obviously, it's it's very tough to succeed.
Sure. So as we're getting to the end of the conversation here, I guess I've got one more thing I'd like to just sort of put a flag in the sand here. I know a lot of people who are dating and trying to get into relationships. I've been married a long time, and the ship sailed for me. But for those people, one of the things I hear coming up all the time is how rapidly they're receiving the dick pics. So is that a big plus sign, or is that something to be avoided, do you think, as a dating expert?
Yeah, it's funny.
Oh my God.
I wasn't expecting that conversation. Of course,
I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but it's funny because I'm hearing that just maybe it's access to camera and penis. I don't know, but there's clearly something going on where this is becoming a card that is played very early in the game, and so I mean, of course, I'm joking, and I know it's probably not the way to approach a young lady or young fella, whatever your persuasion is. But I wonder, do you have any thoughts on the psychology of that? And, obviously let's avoid it, but how do we do something better?
Yeah. I love that question. It's funny. to the right person at the right time, a well-placed dick pic, it can do wonders. But most of the time, it's it's definitely something to avoid. After you've had sex, sure, awesome, send the dick pic. Before, I think you're you're definitely walking on landmines there. I actually have a meme that says, it's the Corona guy, I think, or the guy that says, I don't usually send dick pics. Oh wait, I do. Right?
The world's most interesting man, that guy.
Right. I don't usually send dick pics. Oh wait, I do. And then the follow-up to that is a picture of a rooster. So she's expecting the dick pic to come in, right? And then it's obviously the cock. So that's
I have another one that's like a picture of a deck, and then you send that, and then you say, sorry for the unsolicited dick pic. That was meant for someone else, right? But me personally, I would never send anything like that just because I don't want that shit out there. And I have friends that have done that in the past where she sent pics to her ex, and now there's pictures of her floating around. And so that's my personal opinion on that shit, is I just avoid that. I won't ever send any nudity or anything to anyone because I don't want that out there. That's just my
and I would say, to tie it back to professionalism, it's probably not, frowned on in the office most of the time. So I would maybe avoid it there for sure. But anyway, I just kind of wanted to end on something light. I thought that was fun. Although true story, I mean, I do hear this from a lot of people who are in the dating days, that is a very common occurrence. I wonder, just here at the end of the show, Robbie, if you could just kind of give people a little bit of, where can they find you online? How can they engage with you if they choose to, and that sort of thing?
Sure. You can find me at interconfidence.com. And you can also find my podcast on there. It's called the Leverage Podcast. And if you go to my site, there's a cool little download for how to run an awesome first date. Guys tend to really like that. It takes all the question and mystery out of it. So I'd recommend, if you're interested, just go on over and grab a copy of that, and that'll kind of lead you down the rabbit hole to other stuff.
I love that. Well, and like has been the premise throughout the show, I mean, obviously this is dating advice and lifestyle advice, that sort of thing, but the skills that you can learn in doing that, improve you socially, which can improve you at work and improve you just in your day-to-day life. So, for anybody who's going, why are you having a dating guy on the show? That's the line that we're drawing, is that we think it's actually very important to learn these sort of social skills and be able to carry yourself in a social environment, whether that's at work or not. So I encourage everybody to go check that out, whether you're dating or not. Maybe tell your wife in advance so she doesn't wonder what's up. And, and go check out Robbie over at interconfidence.com. So any parting shots, Robbie, on the way out?
Just kind of circling back to what you said earlier about fear. I mean, that's kind of the big thing. Like, if you can just think about what you're scared of in life and go after that, I can't imagine you're not going to, feel better about yourself and happier the following day. So I love that you kind of tied that into what I was saying, because for me, that's kind of everything. Like, if every day you go to bed and you're like, oh, I did something that scared me, it's probably a good day. So if you're not doing that enough, if you're listening, go do that. Would be my advice. So thanks so much, Ryan and Mike, for having me on. It's been awesome.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Robbie, for doing this.
All righty.
And Mike, any last shots before we get out of here?
Nope, I think I'm good.
All right, cool. Well, thanks so much to everybody who tunes in this week and every week, and we'll see y'all next time.